Good afternoon and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar from Purdue University. Our speaker today is Scott Orton from the Raytheon Corporation. He's the Director of Strategic Research, and his topic today will be the merge of anti-tamper and information assurance. Scott?
Thank you. When I was asked to give this presentation last week, I had two problems. First was I had no idea what I was going to talk about. And the second was that I had never made an unclassified presentation in my entire working career before. So I'm going to make two requests. One is leniency, if this doesn't come across just right. Two is if I do accidentally say something classified, please everybody line up over here so that your brain can be sanitized. Appreciate that. Just a little background on me. My first job, or how I got involved in information security, is through something called anti-tamper, sometimes called anti-reverse engineering in the IA field. I did that for the Air Force for special programs and essentially established their anti-tamper field as it exists today. So when I started that effort, it was nothing but a letter. We knew that we had lots of weapon systems. Those weapon systems were being lost on the battlefield. Additionally, we were exporting a lot of those weapon systems, and we knew that we needed to protect them such that the technologies wouldn't be lost to us or they wouldn't be modified in some way that they'd be detrimental to us. And so we needed a way to address that. And so I supported the Air Force in establishing their R&D program, a lot of the policy that exists for how anti-tamper is applied, a lot of the technologies and techniques that exist today. From there, I went to Raytheon to really make that to go from telling people what to do to telling people how to do it and actually developing the anti-tamper technologies myself. And so we grew that into a pretty large business supporting every service, every military service, every military agency, all the major defense contractors. And so my background, I'm coming to you mainly with a background from anti-tamper, that anti-reverse engineering. Today, I've recently moved from LA to our corporate headquarters in Waltham, Massachusetts, the Boston area, which is why I'm cold. And today, I have a responsibility for looking at all of our university research portfolio across the corporation and investing in areas of strategic interest. One of those is information assurance, information operations. And so that has become a new focus for me for the last couple of years. And so what I'm going to talk about today is kind of bringing that subject matter expertise from anti-tamper, the things I've seen and developed an expertise in information assurance, and how those two things are kind of coming together as I see it. This is a definition of anti-tamper. I'll let you read that, but to give you a sense of this, I'm going to have to digress a little bit. In military systems, let me give you an example of yesterday's and today's radar systems. So we have fighter jets out there today. The radar systems in them are generally mechanically scanned arrays. And these are just like you've seen everywhere. They're big dishes and they can point around. So now let's take a pilot, not much older than you, two big rocket engines strapped to his back, moving at 600, 700 miles an hour through the blue sky, with an engagement coming at them, also at 700 miles coming the other way, and nobody can see each other. Nobody. Everybody in today's modern warfare are miles and miles and miles apart, so nobody sees anybody visually anymore. The people you fight are all on radar, which are all represented by tiny little blips on a screen. Today's mechanically scanned radar can essentially see 2 or 3 of those targets at any one time. And so when a pilot sees somebody, they're like, great, I got a blip, that target is over here. They see another target, great, that target is over here. But that's all that a mechanically scanned radar can see. There might be 6 targets. And those 4 other ones might be moving above them, below them, and at them at all sorts of speed. And so it's a very scary proposition when you tell them, you're going to only see maybe what might be everybody, maybe there might be a lot of people more. You can imagine how that'd be pretty scary. So today's modern radar systems are actually able to see a classified number, but a very large number of targets. So we've moved from where they have to worry about seeing a couple till they can see everybody. And they can see everybody at all times. And in addition to that, they're actually able to launch missiles, launch bombs even, all simultaneously, taking out multiple targets, able to leave the battle space and let their missiles and other things go in for the kill without them even being part of the engagement. The adversary that they're going against still has the old radar system. And so it's a huge advantage that they have. Well, these same radar systems are going to be exported and sold to our allies. And some of those radar systems are going to go into hands that we don't want to, through either battlefield loss or just through being kind of, unfortunately, sold third party to the people we don't want to have them. So what we do with anti-tamper, in that same radar system, the two most common things are, first, there's a front end to the radar system. There's some hardware that enables that to happen that's very sensitive. And so we want to deny people the ability to even see that hardware. This gets very difficult in the case where you have sold somebody this. So I'm going to sell you a radar system. It's your radar system. And I say, you're not allowed to see some of it. So that's a very tricky task, especially since I will never see that radar system again, and I have to prevent you from seeing its internals. The second case is where there's software inside that radar system that provides it functionality. It's probably hard for you to believe here, but military systems up until very recently were completely defined by their hardware. If you needed to upgrade a military system, you had to update the hardware in the system. There was no software upgrades to any military systems today, and that's true actually for most military systems today. That's changing. In the modern radar system, functionality is added just like software updates are today in systems. And so if somebody is given a particular set of functionality, you want to ensure that that functionality hasn't changed in the case where that system is, or the people you provide it to, is no longer friendly to you. And so that's a big issue too, especially if you're that guy with the rockets on your back and you're all of a sudden having to go fight them. So this is the way I think of the world. Pretty simplistic. I can't wrap my head around much, so I try to break it down and make it simple. I think this model applies to computing, and it applies all the way up to humans. So from the computing, a trusted node would be something like a microprocessor. Trusted node might also be a person. The operation would be the operating system, the applications, all whatever software-wise runs on that node. Might also be a person's attributes, feelings, and things that they do. And then the trusted network is just what that is. That's kind of clear and obvious. And so from what I've seen in information security, all problems break down to this task, defending these three cases. In anti-tamper world, we have tended to always concentrate on the trusted node and the trusted operation, mainly because the systems that we're selling aren't networked. A missile goes out, it turns on to do its job. When it's fired, it goes and does its job, and it's definitely not networking after that. So that's the way we've always focused. What's happening today, though, is that that same missile is now becoming networked. We have missiles that will fly for enormous amounts of time. You'd be kind of surprised at how long, and they'll take updates in the air about what their courses are going to do, where they should go, what they should go look at. Some missiles today do a lot more than blow things up. What they do is they pass over certain areas, they'll take pictures, they'll send those pictures back to home. People will look at and assess those pictures and maybe even change where they want that missile to finally be routed to. So there's lots of legs in today's current products. And so everything is becoming networked that we develop today. So we have to extend a little bit. In IA, everything I've seen really primarily has been focused on the network, but more and more has started to focus on the operation, attacks that go at the applications, but at the operating system and all the way down into the rootkit. We haven't yet seen a lot of attacks all the way at the hardware node level, though I'm sure they're going to happen. As soon as somebody starts reverse engineering TPMs and they know that every single computer system out there has TPMs and they can get to them over a network, people are going to start taking those routes of attack. And so I see there are two cases where there's a lack of expertise in both fields but there's some mutual expertise. So kind of what I saw the merge, what I call the merge. These are kind of traits and things I think about when I think about information security. They're either threat-based or there's no general categorization of them, but if I talk about the ability level of the people that we're trying to defend against, particularly in my space and government defense, we've ratcheted up in both. It was always nation-state and anti-tamper systems, and in information systems, we've definitely ratcheted up to that point today with Estonia as a great example. The attack on Georgia is another great example. Software, as I've moved between exploiters in the AT, in the reverse engineering realm and in the IO realm, the attacks that they're doing in software are generally the same. There's very little difference. Operating systems, there's a big movement towards trusted operating systems within the IA field. We're looking at a lot of the operating systems that we've used in embedded systems, mainly for reliability that's needed within a weapon application, are now being used or thought of being used in information assurance fields. So like Green Hill's Integrity software is a good example of that, where people are looking at installing those on client-side machines, on laptops. And there are projects doing that today. Hardware. In anti-tamper, this is where there are some differences. We're very focused on trusted hardware resistant to sophisticated tools and techniques. The issue with defending against the kind of exploitation we're worried about is the article is going to be in the hands of the adversary, and they can do anything they want with it. And so in anti-tamper fields, generally what people tell you at the robust end of anti-tamper is any form of software protection is completely meaningless. It's just not the level they work at, because they're always going to work at that deeper level where the software isn't important to the attacker. They're going to compromise the hardware first and get to the software that way. Interesting thing about IA is that you've always had to work on untrusted hardware. People have never really thought about that. Sometimes they've implied their trust or just said, well, it's a problem I can't really deal with, it's too hard. But you're certainly going to have to move to the state where you're going to have to assume all the hardware you're working on, the clients, the servers, is all untrusted. And you see this movement towards TPMs, which is actually a similar model that has started quite some time ago in anti-tamper worlds. Targets. The targets are very the same. In both systems, the adversary is trying for system alteration, albeit for somewhat different reasons. In anti-tamper realm, we have what we call the crown jewels are called CPI, and that's what that means. So similarly, there's some data that's the crown jewels that you're trying to protect with an IA system. We're trying to defend it against countermeasure development, where somebody understands the algorithms in that radar system to make their missile resistant to it or jammers resistant to it. And that's a little bit different versus the persistence and backdoors. That's usually not much of a big deal in AT. AT is best when designed up front because it's very expensive to try and protect something after the fact. I think that's actually true for your customers that you're going to supply information assurance products to as well. The difference is that our products go out and live for 30 years that we're trying to defend with AT, versus IA systems refresh probably every 18 months or so today. Countries, this one's pretty interesting too, at least in the realm of anti-tamper. Thankfully, a lot of the greatest capability lies with our allies. And so our threat was somewhat limited by those folks who aren't our allies. Unfortunately, the availability of tools, the outsourcing of capability, has resulted in pretty much everybody having access to the techniques, even if those techniques aren't available to them indigenously in that country. They can farm out the capability of reverse engineering something and just get the results back. And of course, you got to deal with anybody who's got high-speed internet access. That's a tricky proposition. I talked about the timelines, and the answer is always the same. The attacker always wins. This is always the case. So we got to think about what we're going to do about that. And so I call this emerge as if they're coming together. Everything's not going to be equal. What I'm seeing is that the technologies being applied, both in attack and in defense, are very similar. The reasons are different. But we should look for unified technology solutions that address all the reasons. So, looking for information security across. So I'm going to talk about 2 lessons learned from anti-tamper field that I think have direct applicability to you in information assurance field, information security field. The first is specification methodology. And I apologize up front. I realize you're in academia and students, but one day you're going to have to deal with customers, and they're really a pain in the butt. This isn't being recorded, right?
No,
Okay,
speak
good.
freely. We
Okay.
got that part out.
And the problem with security, as is the problem, there's only two fields that are this way: security and safety. How much safety do you want? I want to be safe. How much security do you want? Well, I want it to be secure. Well, you can't have something completely secure. We all know that. The attacker always wins. So how secure do you want it? Well, I want it more secure. Okay. Well, how much money do you have? Well, I have more money. How much money do you have? Well, how secure is it going to be? And so you get into an interesting space where people start specifying things by more or better. The problem with that is that's not a way to specify anything at all. And so we had to find a way out of this within the AT realm, and I think it has direct applicability here as well in information security. So, got to have a methodology for defining what your requirement is. Recognize reality. It's got to recognize the attacker is always going to win. Nothing is completely secure, just like nothing is completely safe. It's got to illuminate the security and design trade-offs. Somebody's got to be able to say, it can't be secure at any cost. There's always a cost. And so the methodology has to illuminate those so that decision makers can decide what they want. It's got to inform decision makers way further up the chain who are going to decide actions that they're going to take within a system based on how secure it is. So just to give you a mental model of that, a commander in the field, a commander in Iraq today, may be centrally from CENTCOM, which is in Tampa, Florida. So that's the commander who's actually the controlling commander of everything going on in Iraq. So there are a lot of links that occur between Tampa and Iraq. And so the trustworthiness of the information that they receive back there in Tampa has a great impact on what they decide to do. And so decision makers need to know exactly, in some sense, how secure their system is, where are its weaknesses, so they can then inform their decisions. Believe it or not everybody is a great designer. Not everybody wants to design a perfectly secure system. So a really good specification methodology will actually remove the variability that exists within the final system that's delivered, no matter who the designer is. And it'll also ease some independent assessment, so somebody really can get a good feel for what they got. So my answer to this is trees. In fact, it's 2 trees. Countermeasure trees and attack trees. And these are 2 very different things, so sometimes I think they get kind of mixed up. So this is my terminology for them, and this is what's used within the anti-tamper community. So countermeasure trees always have to begin with an objective. Always, always, always. We can't just take a system up there, say someone's network, the Purdue network. What you have to put up there is that somebody's going to try to get some particular send of data, for instance. Then you got to know something about the system itself. Where is the system? In this case, somebody's going to steal my car, but first I got to know, where is my car? Am I driving my car down the road? Is it parked in a garage? Is it always breaking down, so it's always at the mechanic? Bear with me, people. This is going to a simplified version of what's going on. Normally, by the way, these trees would be maybe as many as 50, 60, 70 nodes down. So we're going to try and really shorten it up here. So first you need to know information about the system. What you quickly find is that there's always low-hanging fruit in any design. And so in the case of this, well, I'm just going to remove the keys from the car. That'll prevent them from stealing it. In some of the systems that we work with, we're going to encrypt the data that's at rest and take the keys with us. Very often in almost all these systems, there's always a case where you're taking a big piece of sensitive information and you're collapsing it into some small secret. From here, you always have 2 choices. And you need to defend both, but the attacker gets to choose. So every tree will always take a split here, and I'm just going to go down one of the paths that's usually the most forgotten one. So usually people will then go off and they'll work and they'll try to defend attack on the keys. But what you have to remember is that the attacker's goal is not to beat your protection system. The attacker's goal is to steal my car. And so you have to always keep your eye on that. So they're going to forget about the keys and they're going to go hotwire the car. But hey, I installed an alarm. Well, here's an example of as I move down through the tree, as opposed to just saying, give me more protection, at each step, I can assess what it's going to cost me to get a particular level of protection in the system. In this case, I bought something, they can ignore the alarm. That's my level of protection within the system for that level of cost. But I'm going to go a little bit further.
So that's intrusion detection.
Yes.
We can choose to listen to the alarms, or we can choose to, oh, it's probably nothing to worry about. The systems administrator can check off and not worry about it.
Yep.
Okay.
From here, I'd say, well, that's not acceptable to me. I'm going to hire a guard. I know what a guard costs. I can price that out. And what do I get for that? Well, attacker always wins. So they're going to disable the guard. Kind of knock them out. Cool. Well, I'm smarter than the attacker, of course. So I'm going to place guards inside and outside of the garage. I'm going to give them radios. When the first guy gets knocked out, he can radio the other guy, say he's coming. All figured out. Well, too bad. Attacker always wins. The interesting thing about these trees is that usually as you work your way down them, you get to some point where magic occurs. And so you usually know that's far enough. I'm going to stop there because no reasonable countermeasure is going to be applied here. But what's important is that you do always end with what we call a residual vulnerability in the system. And in fact, as you do this through a big tree, what you'll find is that there's many residual vulnerabilities left in the system. But the important thing here is that now I can go to somebody, I can add up all my countermeasures and what their costs are, and I can say, here's what you get. You get a system that has these vulnerabilities left in it, and this is what it costs you. If you would like different vulnerabilities, I can tell you what that costs. And so you're able to illuminate those design trade-offs. And in fact, sometimes what happens is you'll look at the particular design of the system, it'll illuminate design issues to you as you work yourself down the tree. And you might be able to cut off complete branches because of something you did that you didn't realize had such a security vulnerability set to it. The other kind is attack trees. So same example, you move down, and the difference in attack trees is that now you have a design. You have a particular protection system. You have it designed out and in front of you. And now you're going to assess it for understanding how the exploiter is going to behave. The reason we did this, at least in our field, and it applies in your field as well, is that the exploiter would always stick up their hand and say, I wouldn't do that. That's not what I would do next. I'm smarter than that. And so you need to really have some model of how the exploiter is going to behave. So in this case, you install the alarm system. The exploiter has several choices. They're going to either ignore the alarm and drive away with your car. They're going to trip the alarm and run away. Or they're going to outmaneuver you by tripping the alarm, using it to their advantage, running in your house and going grabbing those keys. So this, what it does is it illuminates the decision process of the exploiter and allows you then to go to this independent assessment of exploiters and say, well, what would you do? And then it allows you then to design the system accordingly, or make decisions in your design accordingly. It's particularly appropriate for misdirection. I'll talk about misdirection a little bit later. Most powerful tool that you got in your bag of tricks, also the most dangerous. So that's why in particular we use this kind of methodology for misdirection, because misdirection, you always want to understand what the exploiter is going to do, because you're making, whenever you perform or apply some level of misdirection, you're making assumptions about the attacker, and they may be completely false, and if they are, you're doomed. And so that's why we do it. In this case, you're going to park a decoy on the street. First case, they see the decoy, they steal the decoy, and off they go. And they're happy. It's great. And it worked. And so that's a case where misdirection is very effective. Next case is they recognize it, they ignore it, and they move straight into the house anyways and go steal your car. That's a case where you essentially paid for something that had no effect.
Scott, could the decoy be like a honey pot?
Yes.
Okay.
The third case is the most dangerous case of any form of misdirection, and that's where they recognize your decoy, and it draws the interest. It draws greater interest. They go back and they say, this is a terrible example, but they go back and they say, wow, they're decoying me. I thought I was just stealing a Toyota. But apparently, if they're going to go all the work of deploying a decoy, there must be something way better inside this garage, right? So now they go back and get organized. Now, that was the last thing you wanted to do to your attacker. So, just to review it, the biggest thing to remember, countermeasure is the designer's perspective. It's always completely comprehensive. You don't have to have a particular design. You're going to lay it out, and then you're going to make choices. You're going to work with your customer, the system, the person you're designing for, and you're going to make those cost-benefit trades, and it's going to get you out of this, give me more, I gave you more, it cost too much for what I got. You get to avoid all of that. The good thing is they are very big, but they can be reused. A lot of these systems, from my laptop to a missile, break down to a microprocessor, some non-volatile memory, some volatile memory, and some kind of network channel from that microprocessor to something else. That part of the countermeasure tree can be reused again and again and again. Attack trees always represent the exploiter's perspective. Because there are decision points within an attack tree, well, I could do this and I may do that. Attack trees, if you tried to make them for every possible permutation, would be enormous. And so you don't do that. You do attack trees when you really want to understand what's the attacker going to do in this case. Does my countermeasure that I applied make sense? And you're supposed to principally use these with attackers and get their feedback. The other lesson learned is what to really care about. I guess is the way of saying it. In the anti-tamper field, as we were starting out, as a completely new field, we were coming up with countermeasures, and every time we came up with a countermeasure, an exploiter, these communities within the military turned out to be very close, would say, well, I can defeat that with this theoretical magic wand I have. And you always had to take them at their word because they could show evidence that they could break other things. And so we got caught in a game of capabilities. And unfortunately, as we've said, or I said many times, the attacker is always going to win this game. So go on here. This was the hardest chart in the deck to make for me, mainly because everything I know about capabilities are classified. But I think this room is pretty savvy and knows essentially anything that's produced in software can be beaten. I hope you know that. You should believe that because it is absolutely and 100% true. The best software coding capabilities do not exist within this country. They exist elsewhere. And so that where the best designers are, so are the best reverse engineers. Any hardware can actually be defeated as well. It's just a matter of time, cost, skill. Eventually, all hardware is composed of atoms. We can now take apart atom by atom by atom anything we want, and we can understand how it's reconstructed and put back together. There's just no way to defeat that. The tools that are available to people have become widespread. The most powerful tools that used to at one time only exist within the U.S. are now broadly available everywhere. Largely, principally, and now when I was talking about tools here, generally speaking about hardware tools and tools for integrated circuits, mainly because our capability to produce integrated circuits within the United States has all moved offshore. And so the largest foundries are now all exist in other countries. And essentially all the tools that are available for reverse engineering all come from failure analysis tools. So what happens is, in this life cycle, somebody produces a new microcircuit design. It comes out the door, they have some model for how it should work, everything's fine, then it breaks. They don't know why it broke. And then somebody starts a project to go find and develop a tool to figure out why it broke. And so what happens is the failure analysis tools used in reverse engineering have a lag on technology of about 3 to 6 months. It's about where it is. And that's about how long it takes for somebody to recognize something's wrong, develop the tool to find it and fix it and understand it. And at this point, there's few constraints in quantity or knowledge of adversaries. And so the message you should take away, capabilities are completely uncertain. You don't know from one adversary to the next exactly what their capability is. They're highly variable over time, tend to always be increasing, and they're continuously being refreshed. They always have something new, and you're not going to know about it. The good thing about exploiters is that they are flesh and blood at some point. Even if they're botnets, at some point they're being controlled by a person somewhere. And that's the thing you have to take advantage of. This, by the way, is not my list of behaviors. I started it, but then I worked with the National Security Agency, with Sandia National Labs, with a lot of foreign material exploiters, and said, this is how I think you behave. And they'd say, no, I don't do that, or yes, I do this. Okay, I admit to that. And so this list has actually been scrubbed with the country's best reverse engineers. So it's not just my feel of how they behave. They definitely prefer the path of least resistance, just like everybody. If it's easy, they get done, they go home, great. They tend to be extremely methodical. And if there was a trajectory that worked before, essentially an attack path that worked before, they'll always use the same one again. Just like us. Something works, you do it, right? Limited quantities doesn't apply as much in your world, unfortunately, as people can continuously attack you. But in some cases, it does. Limited quantities or opportunities can exacerbate already cautious behavior. So what we have seen in this case is that where we have presented them with protected systems, and then when they see a system that isn't protected but has kind of characteristics that looks like it might have been, they act as if it is protected. So they approach it just as cautiously. So this is where you get into misdirection, and you can really make use of of this particular behavior. New investigations are always tainted by past experiences. If they've seen something before, they believe it's going to be the same this time. You can use this to your advantage in that you might still fall to a certain attack, but you might fall in a little bit of a different way, and use that to your advantage. There's always a higher priority task, always. Really skilled reverse engineers, either whether they operate on a network or whether they operate on a missile, are highly prized individuals. There are very, very few of them, and they tend to be backed up by big teams of people, but generally without the people who are truly skilled at this kind of capability. Even within the US, it's a couple handfuls. It's about that many. And so there's always something more important. There's always General so-and-so who says, this is the most important thing. You've got to figure this one out for me. And that exists countries all over the world. Repeated attempts without success can be demoralizing. Definitely true. People hate kind of banging their head against a wall only to get a bruise on their head. So, again, use it to your advantage. Communication is always challenging. This is, among disciplines, means getting software and hardware people to talk to one another. It's really tough. You can stick them in a room together. That's not talking together. So if you deploy a protection mechanism that forces communication between a hardware engineer and a software engineer, your system will be much stronger. If you take that up a layer to a network engineer as well, you kind of really thrown them into a loop. At the same time, for the attacker to get those big multidisciplinary teams onto a single task for a long period of time, extremely tough. They have other things to do. They'll concentrate on a problem for a little while, and a little while depends on what the particular system is. Could be a week, could be years. But eventually, they'll move on to another thing. We see that when we design systems today. Generally, when we design systems today, you get all the talent up front, and slowly, as the system matures, the talent kind of moves away onto other things. The last three are the most important because they apply to misdirection. And as I said, this is your best technique you have in the back. It's important to understand that satisfaction occurs when expectations are met. Use that to your advantage. Caution occurs when something's a little bit odd. A good example of this may be, let's say somebody's exploiting cell phones. And as part of this process, they remove the microprocessor on the cell phone, and they instrument the die on a separate test stand. And they see a particular pad pattern to that chip. Every single time they pull it off, there's a pad pattern. They put it to the side, they put it on their test stand. And then one time they pull off the microprocessor on the phone, the pad pattern's different. You're going to draw a lot of attention when that happens. It might be for completely innocuous reasons, in case the one I'm thinking of it was. Really slowed them down as an exploiter, good thing, but it drew a lot of attention, which if you're purposely doing that could be very bad. And that really comes to the challenge when deception is apparent. If it appears that you're trying to fool an exploiter, all of a sudden the software, the hardware, the network person, all those people who weren't willing to talk to each other before or come out of their little rooms where they were playing with their own toys, all of a sudden everybody comes into the same room. Everybody's focus is now on that one problem because everybody is excited. And they'll stay all night, all day, row after row until they figure that challenge out. And that's the worst position you want to be in. And that's why I say misdirection is your most powerful, but also your most dangerous technique. And so of these behaviors were true when I started giving this pitch 7 years ago. They're true today. They're going to be true 40 years from now and 100 years from now. So if you got to develop a protection system, protect against the human at the end of this thing, as opposed to what their capabilities are. My last note, which is a little bit different. I am from a company. I am from Raytheon, as you saw in my email address, and so I figured if I was addressing folks at a university, I would at least say what we were looking for and try to do a little recruiting, I guess, while I'm here. Enthusiasm and initiative. There are a lot of people that have enthusiasm. There are a lot of people that have initiative. Having enthusiasm and initiative is a rare individual indeed. So I encourage you to find something you like to do that gives you that enthusiasm and that initiative, and you'll be very successful. No matter what it is. It really doesn't matter what somebody tells you the market needs. If you have enthusiasm and initiative for something, you'll always be successful. Leadership skills are in great need throughout industry everywhere. The ability for people to take up tasks and perform them on their own, or to develop teams to go solve problems with little assistance is a large need. And per the talk today, the people who are going to understand these gaps between node, operation, and network. Because as an exploiter, I can tell you, if I get a node protection engineer or a operation protection engineer, a network protection engineer, and they all work independently, well, I'm going to exploit where they touch. That's exactly where I'm going to go. Because what they're going to do, and they do, I give you lots of examples of this, is they're going to assume the other guy did it. If some hole needed to be closed, well, and this happens today with actually information assurance systems that ride on trusted hardware. In almost every case, the information assurance engineer believes that the hardware person took care of something. And the hardware engineer always believes that, oh, that must have been taken care of in the OS. It won't allow that to happen. And so people who can truly span these spaces, even if it means you give up a little depth in any particular area, but you can walk between them comfortably, is also a very rare individual within our space. So that was it.
Thank you. Sir, questions?
Sir?
I want to a little bit disagree with the adversary always wins. The fact is that information is perishable. For example, software game developers would be quite happy to protect their software for 2 weeks because that's where all their revenue falls in. I know that today's demo for some softwares that I use was yesterday's expensively sold version of it. Of course, there's a new expensively sold version. So information is perishable, and classical information theory doesn't quite capture this, but it's a fact. If I tell you that the train leaves at 5 o'clock, it could be useless or useful, depending on whether 5 o'clock has passed or not passed yet. So I would say that the adversary can be actually made to fail if you delay the success. What you call success is you have a certain model that they should never get it. They should never. But in a different view of the world, where if they get to the destination but they get there too late, they've lost. In that case, there's hope, I think. There's hope, and you can, what would you comment on that?
My comment would be, I agree, information is perishable. So the value of the particular data or protection item that somebody is trying to get access to might degrade over time. And in fact, we count on that both in anti-tamper and information assurance books. The primary point is, as we go out and talk to customers, they largely are unaware of the fact that most systems are fallible, or all systems are fallible. And so they come to believe when somebody comes in their door and says this is 100% secure, they will tend to believe that. So a lot of the people I talk to are customers. And so simply changing their mindset that, as we say, there is always a better attack, maybe is a different way to say it, as opposed to winning. But there's always a better attack to every countermeasure. Would you agree with that? And so it was getting them to understand that no matter what the countermeasure, there was always something else. And so they would stop believing kind of the snake oil pitch that this will solve all your problems, which was a particular problem at the time. Please ask me a question. It's like my only time on TV. I got 8 more minutes.
It's not a question, but it's maybe a comment, and it's that in this area, what you just described is a very real problem, that we don't agree on what we're talking about. So people say, this is secure, or this is trustworthy. And 5 people listening understand it in 5 different ways. I was attending once the RAID conference on intrusion detection. Apparently, one of the speakers was disagreeing with one of the audience. In fact, during the coffee break, they realized they were not disagreeing, because one of them, intrusion is through the network from outside. The other one, it also includes insider misbehavior. And I don't care which one holds, but we don't have an accepted universe. So I guess what I'm saying is, like for example, we just realized, you and I, that we don't disagree actually. What we were talking about different things.
Mm-hmm.
So there is really a need for an ontology in our discipline, in our domain. In a very real sense, we don't know what we are talking about because we don't have an official definition of what this means, or what that means, or what the other thing means. And we are fairly unique in the sciences and in engineering about that. When you say voltage, everybody understands it in the same way. When you say trust, it's overloaded.
Mm-hmm.
Trust has to be, is a living, breathing thing, and it's not binary, and it's a measured quantity, and it's subjective. My view of it is different from his view of it, and it's time variable. Your trust that, the money in your bank you can get back was just recently shaken a little bit, right? It changes. Things change. So, are there efforts you're aware of by the community, perhaps Raytheon or others, and I don't know that personally, to come up with sort of I wouldn't say a dictionary, but an ontology, really an ontology of this is what this means, this is what that means. Are you aware of that?
Within the cyberspace in particular?
Yeah.
We actually are doing a project now to develop something called Cyber Battle Management Language, Cyber BML, and it attempts to do just like that, specific to this cyber warfare case.
So you agree it's badly needed?
Oh yeah, yeah. My only pause would be, I don't know if it'll be solved, and at some level, I don't know if it matters. I know there is some necessity to it so that we can communicate, but the idea of a unified single dictionary, which will explain these terms, I think is kind of a pipe dream, a little bit. And I'm not sure if it's absolutely necessary. Because I can think of many instances where fields collide with one another, but use different terminology for things, and people have found ways to get along with it.
I would like to add something about the common criteria, the CCTL thing. So I think that's kind of common all over the world, and it actually defines trust in a very good way, as in we have a concept of trusted recovery, trusted distribution.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the efforts are already on their way. Like we had that orange book. That orange book was only meant for DoD, only meant for US. Then we have the common criteria. We have the EALs, evaluation assurance levels.
Yeah.
So that specifically defines as in what level the product is at and what things the product is taking care of.
So what you'll find in industry, not to bash common criteria, orange book, or any of the others, is that those information assurance certificate or grading mechanisms have lost relevance because they simply can't be used as a tool for giving some level of certification, EAL levels, in a timely way. And so even actually the NSA, originator of the Orange Book, has recently started working on a new publishing guideline that are much more general, that actually look a lot more like this. These are the class of vulnerabilities that you would have at a particular level, as opposed to saying, submit your tests that you're going to be tested against and how you're going to be tested against them, and then we'll certify those, and then you'll actually perform the test. Business simply can't stand the multi-year process that takes. Yeah. And particularly, a lot of the innovations are coming from folks like yourselves who are starting small companies that are 3 people in size and can't afford the multi-million-dollar effort it takes to get through a common criteria certification. And so, and sometimes some of those are some of the best security products. And so what's happening is the consumer space, be it my particular customer, which is government and defense, or I think even the general commercial industry, is kind of saying, I just can't wait for common criteria anymore. Give me some other way to tell me it's good, and I'll trust that. And so clearly there's some need for something that is quick, usable. I have heard and seen, in particular because Europe is so big into the smart card industry, they have a very interesting certification process. It's a very transparent one. Essentially there's an assessment of peers against each other's products, but it's very much an attack-based assessment. What attacks do you stand up to? And they'll publish a set of attacks that you have to test that you can stand to, and then you come and you get tested to those. It's kind of like an ISO 9000 level certification. I think we're going to have to move more and more to that kind of model, though it's going to be difficult given our intellectual property rights and laws within the U.S. It'll be a challenge.
You mean DCMA?
They expose, what happens is in that European model, they end up exposing a lot of intellectual property information that might be considered sensitive.
You mentioned kind of exploiting between 2 different fields, kind of like hardware and software, and then the network engineer. I guess the question is, well, can you give me like an example of kind of a program or an application that uses multiple levels of security?
You mean that has integration of the security with?
Yeah.
Multi-level security means a whole other thing. And,
okay. Integration of all like different what type of hardware securities are there? I know like the Intel chip has certain. I really don't know of any. You probably have much.
So let's use a case where you have some mechanism, we don't know what it is, that you're going to detect tampering within a system. You got a microprocessor, you have some non-volatile memory, and you have some volatile memory. And so you're going to load your program and your operating system on that microprocessor, and it's going to start executing its program, and then somebody's going to tamper with the system. In a purely software case, what you would do is you would take that tamper and you say, I was tampered at this time, and this is how I was tampered with, and you would take that and you write a little log file and you'd stick it in Flash. Right? Well, from the hardware reverse engineer's perspective, they don't care. Because what they did was they copied your complete Flash file before they started the attack. And all they're going to do is as soon as they see you write that log file, they're going to wipe the whole system out, put back in the original file, and move along with their day. But now they learned something about your system. They learned when you detect something. So they learned about your particular defense mechanism, right? They learned that when I do this, he writes a log here. That means something. And if you think about that, you can iterate that over time. And so the exploiter really gets to understand your system. To marry those two, what you would probably do is you would deterministically set something within the hardware. You'd want to make a modification to the hardware itself, such that then that's tied to that log file, such that the next time you start it up, if that log file wasn't there, you could now completely you could put the microprocessor into a severe halt, which essentially you've never allowed to reboot again. So essentially you've taken an extreme reaction to that case, but because you know that they're tampering. And so we look at things, so if you had a pure software guy, they would never look or even think to look at the microprocessor itself and see a fuse get blown within the microprocessor. The hardware person is really going to, that's all they look at. They look and see where there's fuses and they say, well, these fuses must do something. And so they're very different disciplines. So if you can walk across those, then it's very good. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, that helps.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Quick question. Scott, from a Raytheon perspective and working in the research realm, what do you see are weaknesses of students who are fresh hires into the company? Are there any areas that you think that academia is not doing a good job at preparing students?
You know, probably one of the things that does happen and causes a very high dropout rate, so I think it's partly our problem, but it's kind of necessitated by the business, is that when you come into an effort, particularly a large company, there's already lots of things going on. That's why the company's there, that's why it exists, and you got to kind of find a way to become part of that quickly. And in doing so, you might work on something that is not so overarching. You're not going to be leading the whole effort right from the beginning. And so I think there's an expectations issue with things. I think there's general knowledge of business practices and how businesses are run and what they do. That's really not a technology question. I think the people coming out of school, technically speaking, are very capable. I think it's all those ancillary things that help you kind of, I wouldn't fit in a company is the wrong term. Really exploit, leverage, and take advantage of the things that are available to you. And I think a lot of students come into a large company and feel a little bit lost, and that there should be more hand-holding and assistance. And my guess is the company will never provide enough of that. And so at the same time, I would hope there would kind of be the expectation and a knowledge of how these business practices work and what happens that would be healthy. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Assimilation.
And that's what I didn't want to suggest, assimilation, but yeah, because I think once, at least I tend to mentor a lot of young people within our company just because it's something I enjoy doing. And so when new people come in, I generally make a relationship with them, and then I'll just constantly contact them and say, how are things going? What are you doing? And I find usually once they've kind of gotten over the hump, there's some hump when you initially come into a company where you feel completely lost at what's going on, and all the things that are happening seem to make no sense whatsoever. And after a couple of years, there's an understanding of what's happening. And but generally, those things are not unique to the company you just landed in. They're generally just standard processes, practices, and procedures that if people were more aware of and more understanding of, they'd probably feel more comfortable and would be more productive quicker. Yeah.
Just wondering, you mentioned that executives always read. In that case, what kind of decisions are you reference? There's a lot of levels of concern. If you
Turn on your microphone.
if you consider top level of the template, people always try to do it, but you don't consider your level in different applications, different companies, different applications. Maybe part of the
And I don't know how much, and that, actually this would be a good answer to your question. Exposure to what is actually happening, to the extent you can do that within the academic environment would be very helpful. And not to just, I don't know if everybody can hear the question, but essentially if we use the standard model of 3 levels of attacker, or 1, 2, and 3, where the lowest is kind of the person in their garage, the second level attacker is somebody who's somewhat organized, they kind of know what they're doing, but they're at home and their intent maybe is to shame somebody or get a little money. And then level 3, where you got a nation state concerted effort, somebody can put resources behind it and take a lot of time. Why wasn't I concerned about those level 2s and level 1s? And my answer to that is kind of a scary one, and I hope you understand that it's kind of purposely scary, is that what we see right now, nothing else matters. Level 3 attackers, nation state attackers are everywhere. And they're all over us. And so if you're worried about the 2s and the 1s are getting crowded out of kind of this attack market today. People are very sophisticated in the level of attack, and now I'm talking about both reverse engineering of hardware on systems, but also on the internet we know, or the net we know is the internet. And including those nets that have been secluded and taken off of the internet, even those have issues with them. So that level 3, that nation state threat, and so, you know, if you can guard against the nation state threat, then you easily defeated level 2 and level 1. But they just don't show up on our radar, so to speak.
That's a good place to end right there.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, you know, it's impossible the antivirus task is impossible, you know.
Oh, antivirus is, yeah, completely
There's
useful.